Gibb, thank you very much. And thank you, by the way, just for the record, Ron was nice enough to provide a wonderful tour of Thorheim, the former home of Albion Torget, attorney for the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, to Keith Plessy and Phoebe Ferguson, who were special. So thank you for
You're welcome.
That to happen.
You're welcome. It was our pleasure.
Yeah.
And they were delightful. To have actually Plessy and Ferguson in my house was rather unique.
Yeah, the whole day was unbelievable for us. So here you are, Ron Gibb. My wife probably interfaced with you more than I ever did as the clerk
for Judge Adams.
Judge Adams.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Go ahead.
She handed down those unfavorable decisions that we all hated.
She's the one that delivered them?
We know how the clerks work.
Well, yeah. So, were you destined to be a lawyer?
Was I destined to be a lawyer? No, I wasn't destined to be a lawyer. I went to Niagara University originally to be a teacher, primarily a history teacher, and had a friend who was going to take the bar exam to see if he could get into UB. Wanted company. I said, well, I'm not really interested. Well, come on along. He's a friend of mine. So I did. I took the test, did well. As a result, went to law school at UB with my friend. That's how I did it. I didn't know a lawyer.
Yeah.
Didn't have a clue. So that's how I went to law school. Graduated from law school.
What year?
I believe I graduated in 70, was admitted in 71, and one of the people that was in law school at that time was Warren Erickson from Jamestown. Mm-hmm. I was living in Buffalo, got married while I was in law school. My wife was an RN, so she supported us. Mm-hmm. And Warren couldn't say enough about Chautauqua County and Jamestown and how I must go to Chautauqua County. So I went and met Betty, his wife, and spent time with Warren, and ended up coming to Chautauqua County.
When you came to Chautauqua County, did you work with Warren at all for?
I did not. I came to Chautauqua County, and I started with Ford, Lundeen, and DeMambro.
Ah, okay. And just for the record, that's Al Ford,
Stan Lundeen, and Gene DeMambro.
Okay.
Gene DeMambro basically was retired from law, and it became Ford, Lundeen, and Gibb. Stan, of course, ran off into politics. Mm-hmm. And I decided to split from Al Ford and opened an office in Mayville.
Now, why Mayville?
Well, Ford, Lundeen, and DeMambro had a branch in Mayville, for starters.
That was with Gene. That's where Gene was from. That area.
That's where Gene DeMambro was from. So I was there. I liked Mayville. It was on the lake. It just seemed to be a nice place to live, mm-hmm. You know, living up to Warren Erickson's expectations. I was teaching at the community college at that time, too. Okay. And eventually went with the public defender's office, so that was also in Mayville.
Talk about the public defender's office. So did you just hang up your shingle? Just say, I'm Ron Gibb office outside?
Mm-hmm. I had an office in Mayville. Eventually bought the Mayville Sentinel newspaper. So I edited that. And as a result, got to meet Joe Gerasi. Mm-hmm. Joe Gerasi said, you've got the paper, you know, if you can be fair to us, just fair. There are openings in the public defender's office. And of course, Joe pulled the strings.
Yes. He was the man behind the curtain.
Yeah. So I got in the public defender's office that way.
And you were fair?
I was fair, always fair, yes. I enjoyed being the editor of a newspaper and writing editorials.
So did you own the paper?
Oh yes, I own the paper.
Oh my gosh. So you were pretty entrepreneurial mm-hmm. at an early stage.
I had no money.
Yeah.
I had to work.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of different things.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we'll get into some of those. So then you were the public defender, and who was the public defender?
Bill Erickson. Bill Arison was the public defender at that time, and then later Ed Fagan became the public defender. I was there for 6 years.
Okay.
Judge Adams, of course, was the judge. Mainly I did city court in Jamestown, some justice courts. There was a murder trial that I did that Judge Adams felt the public defender at that time wasn't qualified to handle. I was first assistant, so I had the pleasure of taking this murder trial, which you and I think, discussed a few days ago. The Gloria McNeely, scalding your young child in a bathtub murder trial.
So you inherit your first murder trial. How does one prep for that?
Very carefully.
Yeah.
Very carefully. I'd not done a murder trial before. I'd done felonies before, but not a murder trial. And this was not a nice thing to walk into. The publicity was outrageous. We couldn't get a change of venue. The trial itself took 3 weeks, but it took a lot of prep before that.
Yeah.
And during those 3 weeks, and during the prep before that, I lost a lot of clients.
Yeah.
How dare you defend anybody like that? Of course, I'm in the public defender's office. That's my job. The judge orders you to do it. You know how that works.
Right.
So we spent an awful lot of time and 3 weeks in trial. And
I'm sorry. I have an image, and I don't know where I got it from, but that actually they brought in the bathtub.
This was a Tony Caprino scheme. Tony was a friend of mine.
Yeah.
Ex-police chief down in Lakewood, and then became the investigator for the DA's office. They actually brought in the bathtub. And you can imagine this kind of trial. And with the jury, I mean, I screamed to high heaven about bringing in something as prejudicial as that.
Yeah.
But they did. And I learned a lot from that experience that I carried over into the district attorney's office too, as far as using props.
Yeah.
As far as working on a jury, getting in their head, getting their sympathy, getting them to side with you, which is what you'd like to do as a defense attorney too.
Sure.
In that case, I had no chance.
Yeah.
I'm representing a prostitute. A toddler gets scalded in a bathtub and dies. No sympathy. I did, as a result of that, however, become a character in a play.
Really?
Presented off-Broadway, written by Jim Fox, called Gloria. And it was all about that episode. It was about her young life, about the child dying, the trial, going to jail, how all of that worked, and it was off-Broadway.
Did you ever see it?
I never did.
Never did?
No.
Did Jim show you the script at all?
He did. He did show it to me. I really didn't read it in detail. That wasn't the most pleasant experience of my life.
No, but you got more print then probably than.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It got a lot of coverage.
Yeah.
It did. But it was kind of nasty in that you learn that people in general don't understand the law and how it works. And how you've got the responsibility as a lawyer, especially if you're in the public defender's office, to defend people's rights, to make sure they get a fair trial. They may be guilty, but they still have rights. And so that's what I did.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but it seemed, again, that's just like taking my memory back, but you actually had to find a way to defense all this, and there was whether it was the scalding mechanism on the.
Well, I actually had a medical expert who, as you know, there's an autopsy done, and this medical expert thought this child may have had Raynaud's disease. And this child may have been prone to dozing off, was ill in some way, could have perhaps dozed off, gone forward, hit the knob on the tub and turned that hot water on. And that was basically my defense. This child may have done it to itself. And the mother wasn't there, of course. She was negligent, but that's different than murder.
Right.
She's off in another room. The child accidentally hits the faucet, doesn't know how to shut it off. As a result, dies.
Right.
And the mother's negligent, maybe even reckless, but maybe not a murderer. Didn't work. But that was my line of reasoning.
I don't know why I read so much about that. And was there a red dye part of this? A dye? Did you?
I actually tried to show how this might have happened. And I used another child in a tub with some dye. And I wanted to introduce that at trial to counter the tub deal. And the judge wouldn't allow it.
Okay.
So I didn't get to present my evidence.
So you're from that case. The prosecuting attorney was that Paul King?
It was Paul King, friend of mine.
Talk about Paul while we're on the subject, because he passed away early.
He did.
Unfortunately. A little bit about him.
Paul was from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
He was an excellent attorney. He was a farmer at heart. Mm-hmm. Raised cattle. Had a farm out in DeWittville. And loved country music. We used to go to the local establishments where they played country music to have a few beers. And you know how it works. He was a prosecutor, I was a defense attorney, but we got along great. We were friends. We would go out together. And unfortunately died in an accident shortly after that trial. And then after a brief time, John Ward then became the district attorney.
From Paul, you observing, obviously Paul on the other side of the table, what were some of his skill sets that perhaps you picked up on?
Basically relating to a jury, talking to a jury. Mm-hmm. Don't just talk to your witnesses, talk to the jury. Now, technically you're not allowed to talk to a jury, but you can talk in the direction of a jury, you can look at a jury. And he would do that. He was soft-spoken, and I think that's important. You certainly don't want to show, and this is something a young attorney has to learn, because you walk in there nervous. But you don't want to show you're nervous. Yeah. You want to walk in there with confidence. You want to be the man. You don't want to be upstaged by the defense attorney or prosecutor, whichever side you're on. And you try to take over the courtroom. And Paul could do that. He was experienced.
A little bit older than you?
He was older than me, a little bit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Going back, just again for more biographical purposes, Bill Arison was your first boss.
Correct.
And he likewise passed, when I came fairly early down. What was he like?
He was a former FBI agent, so he was kind of cool in that regard.
Yeah.
He didn't want to run the public defender's office. He was the public defender. But he had me as the first assistant do the hiring, the firing, and assigning of the cases, even assigning him cases. He didn't want to run it. So basically I ran it while he was public defender. He was a great guy, terrific guy. Good to socialize with, very interesting. Had an interesting wife who was very opinionated.
Yeah.
It was fun to work for Bill Arison.
And again, my early recollections is he was kind of advanced a lot of the liberal causes. He was one of the few attorneys who really took on, or anticipated the kind of the liberal civil rights type stuff.
He did. I'm not sure he did it on his own or he did it at the behest of his wife, because she was really into these causes.
Okay, maybe that's it, yeah.
But at any rate, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so Bill's your first boss, your first defender, and then Bill passes away, untimely, and then is that when Ed become, was that an election? I forget.
The legislature at that time picked the public defender.
So Ed succeeded. And did you stay, you stayed in the office at the time?
I stayed in the office, yes.
Yeah. Ed had likewise a colorful personality.
You could say that.
Good observation. That's mine. So you stayed out for a while, and did he run the office differently? Did he actually take charge of that?
He more or less took charge, yes.
Yeah.
Again, that's during the time when I was assigned the Gloria McNeely case.
Right.
Because the judge didn't feel he had the experience at that time to do it.
That was Judge Adams that assigned
Judge Adams
to do that. Okay. It started off in Jamestown, right? It was that McNeely was a Jamestown case.
It was a Jamestown case.
And at that time, that was your area, was the South County?
That was part of my area, yes.
Okay.
Ordinarily, I wouldn't have done a murder case. The public defender would have done it.
Right.
But I ended up doing it.
So then you stayed there for a while, but then you changed offices, walked across the hall, I guess the term was.
John Ward said, so I'll say it myself. He said he got tired of me beating him, so he hired me.
He did say that, by the way.
Did he really?
Yeah.
All right, it's the only reason I say it, because he said it. Otherwise, I wouldn't say it.
No, he said it in his interview. And during that, again, my kid, wasn't the Sawyer case in the middle of that too, so that you coming from public defender to DA's office?
It created a legal problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it was overcome, but it did create a problem.
Yeah. Well, just for the camera, what was the problem?
The problem was that I was in the public defender's office, and then I went to the DA's office.
Mm-hmm.
Now, although I had nothing to do with that case and basically knew nothing about it, nonetheless, I was from the office that was defending. And so then I went to the prosecution. The theory being I might have known a lot of things that I would have said to the prosecution. Mm-hmm. In fact, I knew nothing, but that argument was made.
So did they create a Chinese wall with you? How did they resolve it?
They did. They made sure that I knew nothing about it.
Yeah.
So nothing changed. I knew nothing about it to begin with, other than what I read in the newspaper,
Right.
Gossip.
And again, I recall Judge Adams maybe consistently then did not assign the public defender to Sawyer, but wasn't it Bruce that took that over?
Yes.
Okay. I interviewed Daltonberg, about that case at length.
Okay.
Yeah. Memories. So now you're in the DA's office. John is now the newly elected DA.
Yep.
And did he look to you, say, Ron, now that you beat me up so much, here's what I'd like you to do? Did he give you a jurisdiction?
Oh, yes, I had a jurisdiction. I had various jurisdictions. We all kind of moved around a little bit as necessary, but we had basic jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. Because I lived in Mayville, I had the courts, justice courts around that area, and I had Dunkirk,
Right.
city of Dunkirk.
Okay.
And as time went by, I did all the felonies out of the city of Dunkirk.
I interviewed Bill Foley as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the office at that time, so you moved from public defender, by the way, just for cataloging purposes, who was in the public defender's office more or less when you were there?
Bill Custer was there, Bruce was there,
Mm-hmm.
of course Arison was there. There weren't a lot of us in the public defender's office.
I interviewed Paul Andrews, and I think you hired him.
I hired Paul Andrews. I hired Paul Andrews, and I made him type. I said, you got to type in this job, Paul. He's a very bright guy, still is a very bright guy, and a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
But I gave him a typing test, which I think insulted him. But he was an investigator, and I encouraged him to go to law school, which he did. Came back to Jamestown. I got him hired in the district attorney's office.
So Paul would have been nothing but for Ron Gibb.
No, Paul would have been something no matter where he was. Paul didn't need Ron Gibb.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the public defenders, and then you kind of now, when you move over to the DA's, who's the roster
In the DA's office?
at the time? Yeah.
Well, Bill Foley, Neil Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Tony Caprino was the investigator. John was the DA. I was there. There's another fellow in Dunkirk. I forget his name right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a small office. We didn't have a lot of people.
And Tony was your chief investigator.
Tony was the chief investigator.
Give me your best Tony Caprino story.
No, I can't. Tony used to pull things out of the drawers of his desk that cannot be mentioned, but for those that know Tony,
We do.
they might know what he pulled out of his
Yeah.
desk. I can't talk about it.
Okay.
But he was a character. Very shrewd,
Yep.
very good when it came to elections with
Mm-hmm.
John Ward, because he was into politics. And he knew how to talk to people.
Yeah.
He knew how to talk to people to get them to confess to things, to admit to things. Very down to earth.
Oh, well, he was my mayor for many years.
Mm-hmm. Sure thing.
He ran it. He was like a fiefdom and terrific guy.
Yeah.
And so in Dunkirk, your Bill was up there too. How did you guys divide your?
Bill Foley, to me, was a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
A wonderful attorney. just the greatest guy you'd ever want to know. And he had a way about him too that was really smooth with the jury. He was understated, but could relate to people, could relate to a jury, and certainly taught me a lot. I thought he was great. Much like myself, did not particularly want to get into politics because I think Bill Foley could have been a DA if he wanted to be, but didn't want to be, had a successful practice on his own, and was happy to do what he was doing.
Did he do felonies there? I mean, did you guys divide up kind of misdemeanor felonies that?
I started out with the misdemeanors, he had felonies. It ended up the other way around. Eventually, when he retired, his son came into the DA's office, David.
David, okay.
And David did misdemeanors at that time, and I did felonies.
I got it, gosh, I forgot, yeah.
So I was kind of his mentor, where his father was my mentor.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
And during that course, what other DA, just again cataloging, that during your time period, that kind of became DAs, can you remember other names?
Well, of course, we started with Paul King.
Right.
And then David Civilette was appointed for about a year and ran against John Ward. John Ward won, so John Ward was the DA. For a long time, I served with John. And then Jim Subcheck was the DA after that.
Okay. And so that's the DA's office. And was it difficult, and you don't have to answer this much as I'll ask the question, but politics was a part of the DA's office, which wasn't the public defender in a pure capital P sense. You know, you got to get appointed, and you still got to work the legislature, all that stuff. But in the DA's, you're out in the public. And was it hard to draw in the office kind of where the filter was, the line?
There was always a line with John Ward. All right, we didn't talk about politics. He didn't care about politics. He turned on politics when he ran, and turned it off when he wasn't running. And that was kind of easy. But there was always politics involved. There are always people watching you. There are always people with their opinions that came in, politicians. So you had to be careful what you said and what you did, you know, policy-wise. When he decided to leave and Jim Subcheck came in, the head of the Democratic Party wanted me out because I was a staunch supporter of John Ward, who was a Republican. I was registered as independent and had declared that I wanted no part of politics, but it didn't matter at that time to him. Jim Subcheck, on the other hand, said no. He stuck up for me and said he's the first assistant. He's going to be the first assistant. So I stayed on. So I went through Democrat and Republican administrations, which is kind of odd, but I did. And did you stay in the same role there, basically? Same role.
Jim,
Yep. I probably was more active during John because I was more involved with some hiring and firing and budgets and things like that. John didn't like to go to budget meetings, so so sometimes I would do that. But Jim took care of that on his own.
And you stayed there until you retired, right?
I did. I was there 25 years. I retired. When Jim left and David Foley then was appointed and was going to run, he asked me to come back for a year to take over the North End and make sure everything was running smoothly while he was running for election. So I did. I came back. It was kind of a neat thing to do after you'd retired. But it taught me nothing changed either, so I was happy I retired. So I came back. I worked for that year for David. And when that was done and he got elected, I left.
Was there kind of an aha moment as you're thinking through this process? You've been at this 25 years in the criminal world, if you will, in the law world, where you said, I really want to do something else.
That's why I retired. Especially when I went back for that year. I'm back in the same courts I was in. A lot of the same defendants that I'd seen over my lifetime. I mean, some of this was generational. When I was in the public defender's office, I defended a guy who was in his 70s for child abuse. Park Ketchpole was the assistant DA, and we had a county court trial. And I won that trial. Later on, as a district attorney, I prosecuted his son for child abuse. And still later on, I prosecuted his grandson for child abuse. So, you know, you get sick of seeing the same people.
Yeah.
And that trial, by the way, also taught me something young attorneys should pay attention to. Pay attention to detail. It was said that other children had seen this child abuse through a certain window in the house. Spencer Kirschman, who was our public defender investigator at the time, and I went out to that house and took a look. You couldn't see through that window. Spencer Kirschman was over 6 feet tall, and he couldn't see through that window. We took pictures of him in that window. And later on in my cross-examination, I kept hounding about that window. You saw it through that window, right? You saw it through that window. Every witness, you saw it through that window. And then I put Spencer Kirschman on the stand as my expert and photographer and investigator, and we show pictures of that window and him standing there. That was my whole argument to the jury. They all say they saw it. They saw it through that window.
Yeah.
You couldn't see it through that window. Couldn't. If they lied about that, what else they lie about?
Yeah.
And I won. Now, unfortunately, the guy was guilty.
Yeah.
But it taught me a lesson as I carried over into the district attorney's office. Don't just accept the paperwork you get from the police department. They do the best they can, but a lot of times things aren't quite right.
Right.
Or if there are 6 witnesses, the police like to divide them up and take all their statements independently. Well, sometimes they see things different. You know, about 6 people describing an elephant. You wouldn't recognize the elephant when they're done.
Right.
So you want to go back and go over all of that in detail and find out what actually is the truth here.
Yeah.
And that little lesson about the window carried over into my prosecution days.
Interesting.
You pay attention to the details. Sometimes you win and lose on the details. The one little thing, if you can convince a jury that this isn't right, what they're saying isn't right on this one detail, what else isn't right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of neat what you can carry over.
Take note, lawyers, as you're watching this. So after Dave Foley, you just hang it up. You literally hang it up, and I see you brought some props. Tease us with what you got.
This is one of those little things. This was a misdemeanor trial.
I get zero in on it. Okay.
And again, I'm a character in this book because this whole book was written by the Lapp family who came from Casadega.
Oh yeah, talk about that.
This got national attention.
Mm-hmm.
There was a boy who was taken away from his father in Cattaraugus County, I believe. Judge Himalayan had control of that. And he went and got the boy from Child Protective Services, from a foster home, I believe, and took the boy to the Lapps. They had a farm. They were Mennonites. Now, they don't believe in all the same things we do. Mm-hmm. You know, they're homeschooled, and they don't believe in a lot of the government things that we do. Mm-hmm. So they kept the boy. And when Child Protective Services and the Sheriff's Department went to get the boy, they wouldn't give him up. So eventually, they were arrested in this county for obstructing governmental administration. And in our office, it would have been Paul Andrews that handled that case. I didn't have that case. Mm-hmm. But it ended up in Mayville. And when they came to Mayville, they came with cars of supporters, signs, the press, TV. And so when they got to Mayville, they did a demonstration outside the courthouse. And when it was time for her to go in the courthouse to face her own problem, she wouldn't go. Barbara Lapp. And they locked arms, and they wouldn't go. So the court officers tried, and they couldn't get her. The Sheriff's Department tried, they couldn't get her. And it ended up a big riot. It ended up a big fight. And there were 5 of them that got arrested. That became my case because I had the town of Chautauqua. Lucky me. So the 5 of them got arrested, and they basically got arrested for resisting arrest and obstructing governmental administration and rioting. It was all the same incident. There were 5 people. We were going to try them together. But Judge Mifsud, who was the judge in Chautauqua at that time, we didn't have a courtroom that big. So I talked to Judge Adams. He let us use his courtroom in county court. Mm-hmm. And that's where we ultimately tried this case. Now, it had national significance.
Sure.
They pumped it. I mean, they really wanted all the attention they could get. We tried it there. a unique situation where the prosecutor, one guy, goes up against not only 5 people who don't even want attorneys, they want to do it themselves, but they were all assigned attorneys. So they each of them had their own attorney. So I'm there against 5 attorneys and these 5 defendants, and a courtroom full of supporters. Now I asked Donna Emo, who was the court clerk at that time, to strictly enforce the fire code. I'd never paid attention to it before, but there was a little sign in the courtroom that says how many people can go in there. And I said, don't let anybody more than that in there, because these people were making a lot of noise and a lot of fuss. So she did, and then I had...
By the way, no better person to do that.
Oh yeah, you're right, she could do it. She was the enforcer.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But then we had people in the DA's office and some family and some friends who we would get up there early and put them in the courtroom. So that further diminished the number of these supporters that could be in the courtroom. So I asked all these people to come up early and go, and then they would leave afterwards, but that was the number. And everybody who supported them understood, well, it's the fire code, we can't get in. So they stayed out. However, they basically represented themselves with the attorneys helping them and making objections and perhaps a motion here or there on their behalf. It went on for some time. It was a jury trial. You're an attorney, so you know, you have to be kind to these people. First of all, they're very nice people. They were very nice people. They just felt that God would have protected this child, and they were acting on God's behalf to protect this child from the government.
Sovereign.
Right. And although they didn't believe in a lot of things that we did, boy, they sure believed in the Constitution, and they could quote it. So you got some real nice people, very convinced they're doing the right thing, who broke the law, clearly rioting and fighting with police. Police actually got hurt during this thing. So I wanted to show them a lot of deference, which I did, but I still wanted to convict them, which I did. But it was a very interesting thing. 5 people, 5 attorneys in the county court. It was interesting. And notoriety, I mean, the press was there all the time. TV was there, everybody was there. And eventually, they wrote a nice book about their experience, how it started, about the trial, about their experience in the jail afterward. The Lapp family.
And you get some print there.
Oh, I'm in there. I'm not a nice character, of course, but they weren't too unkind to me.
During the trial, 2 things come to mind. Was the press let in? I mean, was the
the press? Yeah.
Were they taking films or anything like that?
I don't believe the film was allowed. Nobody could do that in the courtroom at that time.
Yeah, I was just looking at the cameras. You're outside the courtroom.
Yeah.
Security? Did you have?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of security because there were a lot of people. I mean, easily over 100 people every day that wanted to get into that courtroom, and I think it only would seat maybe 60.
Okay.
Something nobody ever paid attention to before that.
And did they appeal it?
Did they appeal it? No.
So they accepted it?
They had served their sentence. They, with good time, 8 months.
Okay.
They didn't believe in the system.
Yeah.
I offered them a plea bargain.
Yeah.
Just plead to obstructing governmental administration, no jail time.
Right.
Just plead. Nope. We didn't do anything wrong.
So they wanted to go to conclusion.
Mm-hmm. And they did. You know, you give them credit for that.
Yeah.
You know, they had strong characters. They stood up for what they believed in, and they went to jail as a result of it.
That's a great... Thanks for sharing that. That's fabulous. It looks like the Mayville Sentinel. Is that one of your...
Oh, this is just a funny thing. I got my picture on the front page. I bet you didn't do that. It's funny. It's just a little thing that said that I was admitted and I was opening an office. And it was kind of a nice thing. It was an introduction to the community.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well,
and I didn't own the Mayville Sentinel at that time.
Oh, really?
No, I didn't put myself on the front page.
Oh, that's great. And what else do you have there?
Well, one of the duties that I had in the DA's office was basically setting forth our DWI policy, carrying out John Ward's policy.
Yeah.
And so I did for 25 years all of the fatalities in the county. Anything that may have been something we might have prosecuted, I was called out in the middle of the night or the middle of the day to go to the crime scene, the accident scene, where there was a fatality. So for 25 years, that's what I did, and prosecuted all of these, be they criminally negligent homicides or manslaughters or whatever they turned out to be, where somebody might have been drunk, involved in an accident, somebody else died. So I was kind of the hard nose about DWIs in our office.
So literally, you get the call, the sheriff's department would call you and say, hey, Ron, we got death. And
yeah, Sheriff Bentley at that time gave me the lights and siren and the radio in my car so that I could keep in communication with them. A lot of times this was in the middle of nowhere and I didn't know how to get there. So dispatch would be guiding me as to where the scene was. And I would have to get there in a reasonably quick time because the roads were closed. This was a crime scene. And it might have been the thruway, as it has been sometimes, or it might have been a major road like 60. And they would close it down until I got there. And then I would take over the scene. Joe Gerasi was a photographer during a lot of that time, became sheriff. But we worked together a lot of times with, and he was a very good photographer. Used strobe lights, used everything to get the detail down properly. But for 25 years, I had that sad duty because it's not fun going to a crime scene. Somebody's dead or dying. I've seen people there that were dying and were dead before I left. And their family is there, or their friends are there. And then you deal with the one who had the DWI, and you go to the hospital, you make sure you get a blood test, etc. And their family's there. So on the one side, you've got the victim's family wanting very much for the defendant to go to jail forever. And then you've got the defendant's family who's telling you what a great person this is ordinarily. You know, we had just come from a wedding or we had just come from a party, and yeah, he may have had a couple drinks too much and we had this accident, but he really such a nice fella. And I'm in the middle.
Gathering.
Not making any friends either way. That's the problem with being a district attorney.
Right.
You know, people that are defendants, they don't particularly like you. And people that are on the other side, they want those defendants to go away for a long time. Now, I was dealing with Judge Adams, who was not very severe on these types of situations. People did not go to jail for a long time. And so it was really hard to explain to families who lost people why the defendant isn't going to jail for a long time. It was just his philosophy that he wasn't going to do that these weren't necessarily really bad people. I mean, he wasn't going to send them away to jail. I mean, the worst sentence I think I ever got was a fellow who was coming back from the Stockton Gala days. And he went over on the wrong side of the road, and he was drunk. And he killed a mother and a son, and severely injured two daughters that were in the car also. And that was a pretty horrendous situation. But for the most part, people didn't go to jail a lot under Judge Adams under these situations.
Yeah.
So you had to deal with the family, one way or the other. But for 25 years, that's what I did.
How'd you keep your sense of humor?
Well, there's really no humor in that, although I have a pretty good sense of humor, although I don't think defense attorneys would ever admit that I was born a baby and I was very innocent at one time. But you just have to realize it's part of life.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. And it's true, a lot of these people who committed these crimes and who I prosecuted for criminally negligent homicide were otherwise very nice people. But they broke the law, and they're responsible for breaking the law. They're responsible for drinking. They did it on their own. Nobody forced it, down their throat. And everybody knows if you drink too much, your coordination isn't very good.
Right.
And it's just the way it is.
Just go, this is for the lawyer. Obviously, these things you're on call 24/7.
Yep.
How did Mary is your wife's name?
Yeah.
How did you be able to draw the line of when you walked in the door and put it behind you? I mean, that's easier said than done.
With my family, I talked very little about what I did in the district attorney's office.
Are they hearing some stuff for the first time?
They might be.
Yeah.
These fatality scenes are pretty gruesome. Now, my wife is a nurse.
Okay.
All right, so she worked intensive care. She worked and saw a lot of people that were sick and dying. So for her, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But it's not something you really want to come home and talk about.
Right.
It's just not. And a lot of times I'm up all night, I come home, I take a shower, put the suit on, and go back. I got to go to work. Most of these things occur during the nighttime.
Right.
And a lot of them occur in the winter during very bad storms. So you've got your own butt that you're worried about as you're going to the scene. It's like, why am I out in this?
Right.
Why was anybody out in this? But it's not something you talk about. I don't think anybody, my father-in-law went to court once, I think, with my son. Otherwise, my family never went to see anything I did in the courtroom.
Right.
We kind of kept those things separate.
On those missions, did you have stuff in your car to test? Did you test sobriety?
No, that was not my job.
Right.
No.
So,
Sheriff's Department took care of that, or the state police took care of that, or we got a blood test when we took him to the hospital. Court order from Judge Adams or whoever the judge was at the time.
right.
I didn't do that. My car had boots in it. It had, rain gear in it. It had tapes and things because I did take some courses in accident reconstruction, so at least I would know what I was talking about.
Right.
We had accident reconstruction people in the Sheriff's Department and the state police who did most of that and who would have been my witnesses. And that's another thing we developed under John Ward was a witness training program. Paul Andrews and I taught witness training. And we would have classes of police officers come in, city, sheriff, state police, and teach them how to be good witnesses.
You did that kind of statewide, didn't you?
We did seminars. We did things. Yeah, we
I
did.
remember Paul talking about the program. I forget where, but you and he would go out and other counties and teach.
We would. We would teach how we administered our DWI policy in Chautauqua County. And we had a very good conviction rate. And so other people were interested in how we did it. And the witness training was interesting. Nobody had ever thought of witness training. But I'd had so many witnesses over the years who were great guys and knew what they were doing, but they got so nervous on the witness stand and would never look at the jury. They would look at me all the time. Not a good thing.
Yeah.
Talk to the jury. Technically you can't talk to the jury, but you can look at the jury while you're talking.
Yeah.
And make some eye contact. Develop a little rapport if you can, as much as you can, with the jury, because these are the people you have to convince. You don't have to convince me. You're my witness. So, and there are just various ways that a witness who's a police officer leaves that jargon, that police jargon behind. Put it in terms these people on the jury can understand. They're not impressed by your police jargon.
Yeah.
They don't get it. They don't want to hear it. Come down a few notches and talk in plain language. And so we had a very good, under John Ward, program to teach people how to be good witnesses.
Paul mentioned that part of the training is he would talk about his part was to do the prep and to do the direct examination, and then you'd come in and the witness would feel warm and fuzzy about their presentation, and then you'd come in and eat their lunch.
Yep.
That was essentially what he said.
That is the way it worked.
Yeah.
And it was done on purpose that way.
Yeah.
You go through the routine and they feel comfortable, and then the defense attorney comes in and tears it apart. Be prepared for that. You answer the prosecutor in one way, nice long sentences, and explain your position, and you answer the defense attorney in a different way. Yes, sir. No, sir. No long answers.
Paul is your biggest fan. He goes, Ron Gibb, he would just do the cross-examination and they would be just in shatters.
We had a lot of fun. We really did. And so did the police officers. I think they learned a lot. They were prepared after that for what was going to happen to them. You know, a lot of police officers, they only may get 1 or 2 trials.
Right.
And all the time they're working. So it's nice to have a little preparation and know what you're going to do. And we had a handout with various things that they should pay attention to that they could take home afterward. We may have had a very small office in the district attorney's office in Chautauqua County. We had a very good district attorney's office. We didn't take second place to anybody.
Yeah. Then, at age 60,
60.
you launch from Mayville into other activities.
Well, yeah, we did. We went down to Charleston, South Carolina. I had relatives down there. I had a son that lived down there. And I'd always been a part-time artist, but I really didn't have time to do it. So when I went down there, I got involved in the Charleston Artists Guild. My son had been a member of the Charleston Artists Guild. And then I started in earnest painting and putting it in the gallery and putting it in some of the other places around the, well, there were a lot of different tourist places around there. And so I was painting a lot at that time and became president of the Charleston Artists Guild. Helped run a gallery of 73 artists. So I went completely from law into art. And I may add, nobody ever asked for my autograph when I was practicing law. It was such a different experience. Yeah. Because when you're the artist and somebody buys a painting, maybe they buy it for their mother or their daughter or whatever. Well, can you write a little inscription on the back for me? Her name is Louise or whatever, you know? Or could I have your autograph? We did various exhibits and exhibitions and whatnot. What a change in lifestyle.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're kind of the guy, you know? Not in 25 years of practicing law. That never anybody wanted my autograph or ever thought I was the guy, I'll tell you that.
Oh, fascinating. What kind of style, for the camera, did you historical pictures? Did you abstract
I did some historical things. I didn't do any abstract. I did historical. I can do portraits. I did commissions. People wanted me to do their homes, for example. That kind of thing. I've done homes along Chautauqua Lake. Down there it was a little different. But there are very many historic homes down there. So you would do that in churches. And people would come from all over the world as tourists to Charleston, South Carolina. And buy my paintings and take them back wherever they came from. So that was kind of cool.
Did you sell them up here?
I sold them here. I was in a couple different galleries here, never in Jamestown, but out in the Chautauqua area in Westfield. And I don't do it so much anymore. You know, COVID kind of slowed all that down. It closed the galleries down.
Right.
So there's some galleries I was in that aren't even operating now.
Right.
So I'm not affiliated in Charleston anymore, and I'm not in any galleries here anymore. Slowing down.
Well, I must tell you, just for the camera, I did have a chance to see many rooms full of Ron Gibb paintings, and they're spectacular. I mean,
thank you.
Very, very impressive.
Appreciate it.
Very impressive. And you've owned some real estate too. And I know one of your early offices was probably in a theater which most people don't even know existed in Mayville.
I bought the Swetland building. When I left Gene DeMambro and went out on my own.
Gene, by the way, did a lot of real estate too, right?
Gene did a lot of real estate.
Yeah.
Gene is deceased now, so I can say, I left Gene DeMambro because he was doing a lot of real estate, but he was also in a law office. And it bothered me that he would sell property and then at the same time do the closing. I didn't think that was proper, and we had a disagreement over that, so it was a sudden departure, and I needed an office. And across the street was a man by the name of Chauncey Phillips, I believe, who was a teacher, and he owned this Swetland Opera House. It was 3 stories high, and it leaked from the roof down to the basement. There was only one apartment in it, and I believe one storefront. And it was huge. And it was the last thing on earth I would have thought ever that I would have bought. But I needed an office.
Right.
So I paid $25,000 for this monstrosity that everybody told me they thought needed to be torn down. And I went about getting a loan, fixing an apartment, and then I had 14 apartments before I was done and 5 storefronts, but my law office was in there. And that's how I bought that building. But originally, it was a theater. A lot of vaudeville was in there. And the stage piano was in there that I took home with me afterward. Had to take it out in a crane because it was on the 2nd floor. But I've owned various apartments around Mayville.
And you also own Thorheim.
I bought the Thorheim. That is correct. The Thorheim is a house that, as you know, used to be owned by Albion Torje and his wife Emma. And they were there for, I think, 34 years. And of course, he's famous for the Plessy versus Ferguson case that he lost in the Supreme Court, but was later vindicated in the 1960s in Brown versus Board of Education. And I've had that now for 35 years. I live there. It's very interesting because he had a publishing business. He had a magazine. I had a newspaper. He was a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. Kind of cool.
Because of your ownership, did you feel like you needed to know more about him?
Oh yes, I read books about him. I find him to be a very interesting character. Anybody that would go off, fight in the Civil War, get wounded as he did, badly wounded, and then re-enlist anyway, you know, and go back, fight some more, and then go to North Carolina as a carpetbagger, became a judge in North Carolina, to promote civil rights, to promote the rights of the black people in the South. They hated him down there, of course. He was a carpetbagger. And he was promoting the rights of people that most of them down there didn't think had any rights. So finally, after a lot of threats on his life and his wife's life and his daughter's life.
Ku Klux Klan?
Oh yeah, and just people in general were mean. He ended up coming to Mayville.
Yeah.
So.
A little vagary in my part, what was the connect to Mayville? Was it through Emma?
Not really. They were from Ohio, but he had gone to the University of Rochester, so he was kind of familiar with the New York State area. And they came to Chautauqua Lake, I think, and I have been told and read in some books, just because he liked to fish. And it was a place to fish, and he saw this house that was for sale, that it was a great big old mansion, but nobody had lived there for a while, had been foreclosed on. And he could pick it up for a mere $10,000, which was big money at that time, but he had been making money selling books. He was writing novels, and his novels were successful. He would sell 1 million copies. So at that time he had money. So he bought this house, moved his family to Mayville. And later on he didn't have so much money. It became a burden to have that house, because it is a big house. And they had a lot of political connections. He was not the very nicest person in the world, according to most accounts, but his wife Emma was. And I think she convinced, I think it was McKinley, to give him a job in government again, because they were getting to be quite poor at that time. And then he became consul to the city of Bordeaux in France. And that's where he spent the last 8 years of his life.
I don't know if you were there when Keith Plessy said his family, the Plessy family, came from Bordeaux.
I did hear that.
I go,
Yeah.
you can't make that stuff up.
It's hard to make that up. The connection.
I know. Again, for the record, I read the will of Emma Torje and talking about the Tuesday Club Library, and giving, or at least attempting to give the corner.
She did give it.
Did she then end up giving that? Because there's so many stipulations.
There were a lot of stipulations, but she gave that corner plot to the Tuesday Club to be a library, to be the Torje Memorial Library. It turned out not to be the Torje Memorial Library. It turned out to be the Mayville Library. And that was one of the problems, because if they didn't name it the Torje Memorial Library, then it was all coming back to a relative of hers in Canada.
Yeah.
But that relative was gracious enough to say, "Nah, you don't have to name it that. You can have it." I don't want it.
That's the link.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they ended up with the land. They ended up with the money because she left them some money too.
And that building which is behind your house, the office, was that the office? Was that on the corner there?
It was on the corner. It was a residence at one time, but it's also what Albion Torget used as his public office. He had one in the house, but that was his public office.
And then that got moved to your back.
And when they built the library, that got moved behind the Thorheim.
Thanks for the clarity.
Yep.
Yeah. Because I was reading the will the other day because I got that stuff from the abstract company like you did, and I couldn't fill the rest of the story.
Yeah, that's how it worked. As I said the other day, she also left $500 to be left in perpetuity to maintain the cemetery plot. The interest from the $500.
Yeah, the obelisk.
Yeah.
Wow. Is there anything there in your pile that we haven't talked about that you brought?
No, not really. Just a few little things that I brought. The last trial I had was a trial about a stabbing in Dunkirk. You always remember your last county court trial.
Yeah.
And that involved multiple stabbing in Dunkirk. Dunkirk was my territory at that time. And it was said, even amongst the people in the DA's office, one of our assistants in particular, "You will never convict this guy. You just won't, because you're not going to get the people that know him to come in there and testify against him. And besides that, it's all circumstantial anyway, so good luck to you." And this assistant DA even sat in the courtroom with his friends and family while I was trying to prosecute him. I later got that stopped because I didn't think that was right, that an assistant would sit with the defense people. But at any rate, it was a conviction. That person got 20 years.
As you reflect back on all of this, Ron, are there certain lessons or highlights, or perhaps that you want to share for the camera? Kind of the maybe lessons learned, or something that might be educational for a lawyer who's listening to this.
Well, first of all, I'm nothing special. I mean, there are a lot of people that prosecute. There were a lot of people in our office that are very good and were very good that were there before. All I did was learn as I went along. As I said, I learned as a defense attorney to do a lot of things as a prosecutor. And if you're there for 25 years, I mean, I was there longer than most, according to what they told me. They let me keep my badge because they said, if you're here that long, you've earned that badge. So Ron Gibb still has a badge.
There we go, fantastic.
Which is a memento. It's in my wallet, I keep it. I loved my years in the district attorney's office and all the people that I worked with. They were very professional, hardworking, fair people, doing what we took an oath to do, and that is to administer justice. We didn't just try to nail people and throw them in jail. Not everybody belongs in jail. Some people commit crimes out of necessity, and that may sound funny, but if you're really, really hungry. My wife and I took in one person when I was in the public defender's office who was thrown out of his house by his parents in the winter and was later arrested for burglary because he was in somebody's cottage in the winter. They weren't there, but he had broken into the cottage for food, got caught, was in jail. I convinced the judge to release him in my recognizance. We took him home. He lived with us for a while. Yeah, he's a burglar. He broke into somebody's place and he sold stuff because he was eating there. But this is a crime of necessity. All people that commit crimes aren't bad. You learn that too when you're spending over 30 years in the criminal justice system. You know, you want to mete out justice, not just harsh penalties. The Lapps thought they were getting harsh penalties. Unfortunately, they didn't believe in our system of law. They weren't there to cooperate. But over time, you learn to relax a little bit. Don't be so hard-nosed. Look at the other side of the story. You might learn something. And pay attention to details, because you can win things with the details.
Sure. What's the question I should be asking you as you're driving down here from Mayville today that you thought, I wonder if Greg will ask that question, and I haven't yet?
I think you've done a wonderful job. I'm not going to give myself a question.
That's the great lesson being a district attorney. This has been great, Ron. Thank you for sharing all this.
It's been fun, Greg.
It's been special. And then when I see Paul and Neil, those guys, I'll send you your best. That'd be terrific.
Oh, do that. They're all friends, of course, and we don't see each other very often. Paul and I see each other more often, and sometimes I run into John. Or Grace. Grace Hanlon, now the Supreme Court judge. She's a friend.
Yeah.
But, we all kind of go our separate ways. It's like families nowadays. Families move away,
Okay.
I've got children in Florida and North Carolina, and you don't get to see them often.
Well, this has been fabulous. And when Ferguson and Plessy come back up, and they will next summer, we'll
Oh, yeah.
seriously get together.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Thank you, Ron.